Have you ever given someone 15 years of your life? 15 years of waking up before dawn and coming home after dark? 15 years of sacrificing your own plans and dreams and freedom, only to discover that the person you did it all for had been lying about who you were, erasing your identity, denying your very existence as family, reducing you to nothing more than hired help in the eyes of the people you loved most in this world? I have. And the moment I discovered that my own daughter Jessica had been telling my grandchildren for their entire lives that I was not their grandmother but just the babysitter, just some woman paid to watch them, just an employee with no blood, connection, and no claim to their love, was the moment everything I thought I knew about my family shattered into a million pieces that could never be put back together the same way again. My name is Barbara. I am 72 years old, and this is the story of how I spent 15 years raising my daughter's 3 children while working full-time to support myself, how I discovered the devastating lie she had been living, and how the truth came out in the most unexpected and painful way possible, exposing not just her deception, but the deeper issues of shame and selfishness that had poisoned our relationship without me even realizing it. If you are watching from anywhere in the world, please stay with me until the very end, because this story is about more than just one grandmother's heartbreak. It is about the invisible labor that women do for their families, about the ways we are taken for granted and erased, about what happens when unconditional love meets unlimited entitlement, and about the moment when silence breaks and truth demands to be heard no matter how uncomfortable it makes everyone. There are moments that define your life, moments when everything you believed about your relationships and your worth and your place in the world gets called into question, when reality reveals itself to be completely different from what you thought you were living. And for me, that moment came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when I picked up my 3 grandchildren from school, just like I had done thousands of times before, and my oldest grandson Ethan, who was 15 years old and going through that phase where teenagers suddenly see the world with new eyes, asked me a question that seemed innocent but would change everything. He said, "Grandma Barbara, how much does Mom pay you to take care of us? Because Tyler's mom pays their babysitter like $20 an hour, and I was wondering if you get paid more because you have been doing it so much longer." The question hit me like a physical blow. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment I could not breathe, could not process what I was hearing. And I managed to say in a voice that sounded strange even to my own ears, "What do? You mean how much does she pay me?" "Ethan, I am your grandmother. I do not get paid. I take care of you because I love you, because you are my grandchildren." And I saw his face in the rearview mirror, saw the confusion and the dawning realization that something was wrong, and he said quietly, "But Mom always says you are the babysitter. She tells people that we have a really great babysitter who has been with us forever. She has never called you our grandmother when she talks about childcare." I thought, we call you Grandma Barbara, but I thought that was just like a nickname, because you have been around so long. I did not know you were actually Mom's mother. I thought you were just someone she hired." The world tilted sideways. The traffic around me became a blur of shapes and sounds that I could not quite process, and I heard myself saying things to Ethan and his siblings, assuring them that, yes, I was their real grandmother. Yes, I was their mother's mother. Yes, we were actual family, not just a business arrangement. But inside I was screaming. Inside everything was chaos and pain and disbelief. Because how could my daughter have done this? How could she have erased me, denied me, reduced 15 years of love and sacrifice to nothing more than a paid service? How could she have robbed her own children of knowing who I really was to them? And most devastating of all, how could she have been so ashamed of me, so embarrassed by her own mother, that she would rather pretend I was hired help than acknowledge our blood connection? Before I tell you about the confrontation that followed, and the family explosion that tore us apart, and the painful reconstruction of relationships that has taken place in the 2 years since that terrible day, I need to take you back to the beginning, to show you how we got here, to trace the path from the moment Jessica was born to the moment she decided I was not good enough to be publicly acknowledged as her mother, because this story is not just about one lie. It is about a lifetime of choices and compromises and misunderstandings, about class and shame and the ways daughters sometimes reject their mothers in pursuit of a different life, about how love alone is not always enough to bridge the gap between who we are and who our children wish we were. My story begins 72 years ago in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, where I was born to parents who both worked in the auto factories, my father on the assembly line and my mother in the cafeteria. And we were not poor exactly, but we were never comfortable either. Every dollar was stretched and every purchase carefully considered, and the idea of college or travel or any kind of life beyond the factory walls seemed like a fantasy for other people. People who were born into different circumstances. People whose parents wore suits to work instead of coveralls, stained with grease and sweat. I was a bright child. Teachers told my parents I had potential, that I should think about higher education, but we all knew that was not realistic. My parents needed me to work as soon as I was old enough, needed my income to supplement theirs, needed me to contribute to the family's survival. And so when I graduated from high school at 18, I got a job as a receptionist at a small accounting firm, and I was grateful for it. Grateful to have work that did not destroy my body the way factory work destroyed my parents. Grateful to wear a skirt and blouse to work instead of a hairnet and apron. Grateful to have a desk and a typewriter and business cards that said, Barbara, Morrison receptionist, as if that made me professional, as if that meant I had made something of myself. I met Tom when I was 20. And he was 22. He worked in maintenance at the same building where my firm had offices, and he was handsome in a rough, uncomplicated way, with strong hands, and an easy smile, and dreams that were exactly the size of mine, small and achievable. A house, a family, a decent life. Nothing fancy, but solid, reliable, safe. We dated for a year and married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse because a big wedding seemed like a waste of money we did not have. And we moved into a small apartment and started our life together with the kind of optimism that comes from not knowing yet how hard everything would be, how much work it would take just to stay afloat, how the dreams we had would have to be constantly revised downward to match reality. Jessica was born 2 years into our marriage, and from the moment I held her, I knew she was destined for something. More than what I had, she was beautiful in a way that seemed almost aristocratic, with delicate features and an alert intelligence in her eyes even as an infant, and I promised myself that my daughter would have opportunities I never had, that she would go to college, that she would escape the cycle of working-class struggle that had defined my family for generations, that she would become someone important, someone respected, someone who never had to worry about money or feel ashamed of where she came from. Tom and I worked ourselves to exhaustion to make that possible. I kept my receptionist job and took on additional work typing manuscripts. At night, Tom worked overtime whenever it was available and took side jobs on weekends. We saved every penny we could in a special account for Jessica's education. We went without vacations and new clothes and any kind of luxury, so that she could have piano lessons and ballet classes and tutoring, all the things that would position her to succeed in ways we never could. And Jessica absorbed all of this investment and attention and became exactly what we hoped. She excelled in school. She was poised and articulate and ambitious. She got into a good university on a combination of scholarships and our savings. And when she graduated with a degree in marketing and got a job at a prestigious firm in the city, we were so proud we could barely speak. Our daughter had made it, had broken free, had become the kind of person who wore designer clothes and went to networking events and had business cards that said, Jessica Morrison, marketing director, as if she had always belonged in that world, as if she had not come from a 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood where her parents counted pennies and wore second-hand clothes. But somewhere in that transformation, somewhere between the girl we raised and the woman she became, Jessica started to pull away from us, started to seem embarrassed by our lack of sophistication, started to make excuses about why we could not meet her friends or attend her work events, started to suggest that maybe it would be better if we did not mention to people what we did for a living or where we lived, started to create a distance that felt deliberate and painful, as if she was trying to erase her origins, to reinvent herself as someone who had sprung fully formed into the professional class without any messy working-class roots to explain or apologize for. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was young and trying to find her place in a new world, and eventually she would circle back to us, would realize that family mattered more than image, that she did not need to be ashamed of where she came from. But the distance only grew, and when she met Richard, a man from a wealthy family who worked in finance, I knew immediately that we were going to lose her in some fundamental way, that she saw him as her ticket to permanent escape from the life she had been born into, and that we, her parents, who had sacrificed everything for her success, were now liabilities to be managed and minimized. They married in an elaborate wedding that Richard's parents paid for, a wedding where Tom and I felt like uncomfortable guests rather than the bride's family, where we did not know anyone, and no one seemed particularly interested in knowing us, where Jessica introduced us to people with a brevity that suggested she wanted to move past us as quickly as possible. Just, these are my parents, with no stories or context or warmth, as if we were strangers she had to acknowledge out of obligation, rather than people she loved and who loved her. Tom died 5 years into Jessica's marriage, a heart attack at work, sudden and devastating, and I was left alone at 55 years, old with no real savings because everything had gone to Jessica's education, with a job that barely covered my rent, with a daughter who had built a life I was not really part of, and I did not know what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life, how I was supposed to fill the emptiness that Tom's death and Jessica's distance had created. And then Jessica called me and said she was pregnant. She and Richard were having a baby. I was going to be a grandmother. And for the first time in years, I felt a surge of hope, a belief that maybe this would bridge the gap between us. Maybe a grandchild would remind her that family mattered, that blood was real, that I had value beyond the embarrassment of my working-class origins. When Ethan was born, I fell in love all over again with this perfect tiny human who had my daughter's face and my late husband's eyes, and I would have done anything for him, anything at all. And when Jessica asked if I could help with childcare, because daycare was so expensive, and she wanted to keep working, and Richard's mother was not available, and they really needed someone reliable and trustworthy, I said yes immediately. Of course, yes, I would be honored, thrilled, grateful for the chance to be part of my grandson's life, to be needed, to be wanted, to maybe repair the relationship with my daughter through this new connection. What I did not fully understand at the time, what I would not understand for 15 years, was that Jessica was not asking me to be a grandmother. She was hiring me to be a babysitter. And the fact that I was free, that I did it out of love, rather than for payment, did not change how she saw the arrangement or how she would present it to her children and her world. I was not family helping family. I was staff. I was the help. I was someone performing a service that she would have had to pay for if I was not conveniently available and willing to work for free. The arrangement started simply enough. I would come to their house 3 days a week to watch Ethan while Jessica was at work, and I would bring him back to my small apartment the other 2 days so Jessica could have some flexibility. And I did everything, fed him, and changed him, and played with him and soothed him when he cried. And I loved every moment, loved being needed, loved the weight of his small body in my arms, loved watching him grow and change, loved feeling like I had purpose again after years of loneliness and invisibility. When Ethan was 2, Jessica had another baby, my granddaughter Claire, and the childcare needs expanded. Now I was watching 2 children 5 days a week, getting up at 5 in the morning to get to their house by 6, so Jessica could get to work on time, spending all day caring for 2 active small children, and then going home exhausted to my apartment to eat dinner alone and fall asleep watching television. But I did not mind, did not complain, because these were my grandchildren, because I loved them, because this was what grandmothers did. They helped, they sacrificed, they gave without expectation of return beyond the joy of being part of their grandchildren's lives. If you are watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you are a grandmother who has given everything to help your children only to feel taken for granted and undervalued, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, because we are building a community of grandparents who understand that love should not mean erasure, that helping should not mean invisibility, that we deserve acknowledgement and respect for what we contribute, and your subscription helps us spread this message to others who need to hear it. So please click that button and join us in demanding the recognition we have earned. When Jessica announced her 3rd pregnancy, I did not know how I would manage. I was already watching 2 children full-time while working part-time at a grocery store on weekends to supplement my social security. I was exhausted constantly. My knees hurt and my back ached, and I was not young anymore. But when she asked if I could continue helping after the baby came, I said yes, because what else could I say? No, she would have to pay for daycare for 3 children, which she could not afford. No, I would not help my own grandchildren. No, family did not matter as much as my comfort. I could not say those things, could not bear to be the kind of mother and grandmother who put herself first. So I said yes, and when my grandson Lucas was born, I took care of him too. 3 children under 5 years old, in my 60s, working essentially full-time as an unpaid nanny, while Jessica and Richard built their careers and their comfortable life. The years blurred together into a routine of constant motion, every morning at their house by 6 preparing breakfast, getting the older children ready for school, caring for the youngest, doing laundry and light cleaning because it just made sense since I was there anyway, picking up the children from school, helping with homework, making dinner for them and often for Jessica and Richard when they worked late, giving baths, reading stories, putting them to bed, and then finally going home to my empty apartment at 8 or 9 at night to fall into bed exhausted. And the next day doing it all again, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, when Jessica and Richard had social events or work obligations on weekends. 15 years of this. 15 years of putting my life on hold. Of having no energy for friends or hobbies, or dating or anything beyond survival and service. 15 years of watching my grandchildren grow up, of being there for every milestone and every moment, of loving them with a fierce devotion that felt like the most important thing I would ever do. But here is what I did not see, what I refused to let myself see because acknowledging it would have been too painful. Jessica never introduced me as her mother to her friends, never invited me to school events as the grandmother, never included me in family photos that she posted on social media, never acknowledged in any public way that I was family rather than hired help. And when I occasionally mentioned this to her, when I said gently that it hurt to be left out or that I wished she would introduce me as her mother instead of just saying, "This is Barbara," she would sigh and say I was being too sensitive, that she did acknowledge me, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she was busy and stressed, and could I please not add to her problems by being difficult. And I would back down, would swallow my hurt, would tell myself I was overreacting, because maintaining the peace and maintaining my access to my grandchildren felt more important than standing up for my own dignity. The children grew up calling me Grandma Barbara, which I loved, which felt like proof that they knew who I was. But I see now that I should have wondered why Jessica never corrected people who assumed I was the babysitter, why she let her friends and colleagues, and even her children's teachers believe that I was paid help rather than family, why she never clarified the relationship, why she let the misunderstanding stand unchallenged year after year. And I should have realized that this was not accidental, that this was a choice she was making. A deliberate decision to keep me in a box labeled staff rather than mother, to maintain the fiction that she had sprung fully formed into her privileged life, without any working-class baggage, in the form of a mother who worked at a grocery store and lived in a tiny apartment and did not know how to dress for charity galas or make small talk at networking events. The truth started to reveal itself in small ways that I did not want to see, like the time I overheard Jessica on the phone with a friend talking about how hard it was to find good childcare, saying, "We have been so lucky to have the same babysitter. For years, she is practically family." As if being practically family was the same as being actually family. As if the word practically was not doing enormous work to maintain the distance she needed. Or the time I arrived early to pick up the children from a birthday party and heard another mother say to Jessica, "Your babysitter is so dedicated. You are so lucky she has stayed with you so long." And Jessica just smiled and said, "Yes, we are very fortunate." Not correcting the assumption, not claiming me, not saying, "That is actually my mother." Just accepting the misidentification as if it was accurate or at least convenient. I told myself it did not matter, that I knew who I was, even if Jessica could not acknowledge it, that my relationship with my grandchildren was what mattered, and they knew I was their grandmother, so the rest was just semantics. But that was a lie I told myself to avoid facing the painful truth that my daughter was ashamed of me, that after everything I had done, after sacrificing my youth and my marriage savings and my retirement dreams to give her opportunities, after 15 years of free childcare that allowed her to build her career, she still saw me as an embarrassment, still could not publicly claim me as her mother, still needed to maintain the fiction that she had achieved her life entirely on her own, without any help from working-class parents who did not fit the image she wanted to project. And then came that Wednesday afternoon, that moment in the car with Ethan, that question that cracked everything open. How much does Mom pay you? As if I was an employee. As if 15 years of love had been a transaction. As if I was owed wages rather than gratitude and acknowledgement and basic respect. And I realized that Jessica had not just hidden our relationship from strangers and colleagues. She had hidden it from her own children, had let them grow up believing their grandmother was just a hired babysitter who happened to be around a lot, had denied them the truth of their own family, had robbed them of understanding who I was and what I had done and why I had done it. I drove the children to their house in a daze, my mind spinning with hurt and rage and disbelief. And when we arrived, Jessica was not home yet. She was working, late as usual, as she had for 15 years while I picked up all the slack, while I made it possible for her to have the career she wanted without worrying about childcare. And I told the children to start their homework and I would make them dinner. But my hands were shaking and I could barely focus. And when Jessica finally walked in at 7:30, looking tired and stressed, her designer bag over her shoulder and her phone in her hand, I looked at her and said in a voice I barely recognized as my own, "We need to talk now. The children can hear us or not. I do not care anymore. But you are going to tell me right now why you have let your children believe for their entire lives that I am just the babysitter. Why you have erased me. Why you have been so ashamed of your own mother that you could not even tell your children who I really am." The color drained from Jessica's face, and she looked at the children who had stopped what they were doing and were staring at us with wide eyes, and she said tightly, "Mother, this is not the time. Let us talk about this later." But I was done. Done with later. Done with swallowing my feelings to make her comfortable. Done with being erased and dismissed and treated as if my hurt did not matter. And I said louder, "No, we are talking about this now. Ethan asked me today how much you pay me to babysit. He did not know I was your mother, his own grandmother. He thought I was just someone you hired. And I need to understand how you could do this, how you could deny me, how you could be so ashamed of where you came from that you had to pretend I did not exist as your mother." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but there was anger there too. And she said in a voice shaking with emotion, "You do not understand. You do not understand what it is like to come from where we came from and try to make it in a world where everyone has advantages you never had, where everyone can trace their family back generations and talk about their parents' accomplishments and their prestigious educations. And I have what? Parents who worked in factories and grocery stores, a mother who lives in a tiny apartment and shops at thrift stores, and I am supposed to parade that around, supposed to make sure everyone knows that I clawed my way up from nothing, that I do not really belong in this world I have built. And yes, okay, yes, I have let people think you are the babysitter because it is easier, because it means I do not have to explain, because it means I do not have to watch people's faces change when they realize what I came from. And maybe that makes me terrible, but at least I am honest about it now. At least you finally know the truth." The room was silent except for the sound of my grandson Lucas crying. Quietly, he was only 10 years old and did not fully understand what was happening, but he understood that it was bad, that his mother and his grandmother were saying things that could not be unsaid, that something was breaking that could not be fixed. And I looked at Jessica, at this woman I had raised, at this daughter I had sacrificed everything for, and I saw someone I did not recognize, someone so consumed by shame and ambition that she could erase her own mother, could deny her own children the truth of their family, could stand there and defend it as if it was reasonable, as if her embarrassment justified 15 years of lies. "So you used me," I said flatly, and she flinched but did not deny it. "You used me for 15 years, Let me raise your children while you built your career. Let me work for free while you and Richard lived your comfortable life. And the whole time you were ashamed of me. The whole time you could not even acknowledge me as your mother. And you justified it by telling yourself it was about protecting your image, about making things easier, about not having to explain. But really it was just about you, about your shame, about your desperate need to pretend you are something you are not, someone who was born into privilege instead of someone whose mother worked herself to exhaustion to give you a chance at a better life. Jessica was crying now, makeup running down her face, and she said brokenly, I am sorry, I am so sorry. I know I hurt you. I know this is wrong. But I did not know how to tell the truth. I did not know how to admit to people that my mother is the babysitter, that I could not afford regular childcare, so my mother does it for free. That sounds pathetic. That sounds like I am taking advantage, which I guess I am, which I guess I have been all along. And I said cold and final, you are right about one thing. You have been taking advantage. You have been using me. But you are wrong about something else. You did not have to tell people I was the babysitter. You could have told them I was your mother, their grandmother, family helping family. Because that is what we do. There is no shame in that. The only shame is in denying it, in pretending I do not matter, in erasing me to make yourself look better. I looked at my grandchildren, all three of them crying now, confused and hurt and caught in the middle of an adult conflict they should never have had to witness. And I felt a wave of guilt for letting them see this, for exposing them to this painful truth in such an ugly way. But I also felt a strange relief, because the secret was out, because they finally knew who I really was, because I was no longer invisible. And I said to them directly, I want you to know that I am your grandmother. I am your mother's mother, and I have loved you since the day each of you was born. I have taken care of you not because I was paid, but because you are my family, my grandchildren, and nothing your mother said or did not say changes that I am your grandmother, and I love you, and I am so sorry you did not know the truth. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice cracking with emotion. I am so sorry, Grandma. I am so sorry I did not know. I feel so stupid. I should have known. I should have realized. And I went to him and hugged him and said it was not his fault. None of this was his fault. He was not responsible for the lies adults told. And Claire and Lucas joined the hug, all of us holding on to each other while Jessica stood apart, isolated by her own choices, by the distance she had created, by the lies she had maintained. If this story is breaking your heart because you have lived some version of it, if you are a grandparent who has been taken for granted or erased or denied, please subscribe to this channel right now and share this video, because we need to tell these stories. We need to expose the ways families exploit and dismiss and erase the people who love them most. We need to build a community where grandparents understand their worth and demand the respect they deserve. So please subscribe and help us spread this message to others who need to hear it. I left that night, and I did not go back. I called Jessica the next day and told her that I was done, that I would not be providing free childcare anymore, that she needed to make other arrangements, that I would always love my grandchildren and wanted a relationship with them, but it would be on different terms. Terms that required honesty and acknowledgement and respect. And I heard her panic, heard her saying she could not afford childcare for 3 children, that she needed me, that we could work this out, but I said no, this was not something we could work through with a conversation. This required fundamental change, required her to face her shame and deal with it, required her to acknowledge publicly that I was her mother and their grandmother, required her to stop treating me as staff and start treating me as family. And until she was willing to do that, I was not willing to participate in the charade anymore. The weeks that followed were agony. Jessica tried calling me, tried apologizing, tried explaining that she understood now how much she had hurt me, and she wanted to make it right. But her version of making it right was superficial, was saying she was sorry without changing anything, was asking me to come back to childcare duties while making vague promises about being better, and I held firm. I said no. I would not go back to being invisible. I would not go back to being erased. I would not sacrifice myself anymore for a daughter who could not even publicly claim me as her mother. The children called me too, crying, saying they missed me, asking when I was coming back, and those calls broke my heart into pieces. But I tried to explain to them that I needed to take care of myself, that sometimes adults have to make hard choices to protect themselves, that I loved them, but I could not keep doing what I had been doing, and I hoped someday they would understand. Jessica and Richard scrambled to find childcare, a patchwork of after-school programs and babysitters, and Richard's mother reluctantly agreeing to help 2 days a week. And I knew it was chaos for them, knew they were stressed and stretched thin, knew they were probably angry at me for withdrawing my labor at such an inconvenient time. But I also knew that I had to do this, had to set this boundary, had to insist on being seen and valued and acknowledged, or I would die invisible, die having given everything and received nothing but the scraps of affection Jessica was willing to throw my way when it was convenient for her. 3 months after I stopped providing childcare, Jessica called and asked if she could come over to talk, just the two of us. And I agreed because some part of me still hoped we could repair this, still hoped my daughter could find her way back to me, could shed her shame and embrace the truth of where she came from and who had helped her get where she was. She came to my small apartment, this place she had always been too embarrassed to visit, and she looked around with eyes that seemed to really see it for the first time, and she cried and said she was ashamed of herself, ashamed of how she had treated me, ashamed that it had taken losing me to understand what she had, and she said she had been in therapy, was working through her issues with class and shame, was trying to understand why she had felt such a desperate need to distance herself from her origins, and she knew it did not excuse what she had done, but she hoped I could forgive her, hoped we could start to rebuild. I listened to all of this, and I wanted to forgive her immediately, wanted to hug her and tell her everything was fine and we could go back to how things were, but I knew that would be a mistake, knew that forgiveness without accountability was just enabling. So I said I appreciated her apology, and I believed she was sorry, but words alone were not enough. I needed to see change, needed to see her tell the truth to her children and her friends and her colleagues, needed to see her acknowledge publicly that I was her mother, needed to see her treat me as family, not as staff, and only then could we start to repair what had been broken. Jessica nodded and said she understood, and she asked if I would come to dinner the following week, that she wanted to do something to start making amends, and I agreed cautiously, not sure what to expect, but willing to see if real change was possible. The dinner was at their house, and when I arrived I noticed immediately that the house was decorated with framed photos I had never seen before, photos of me with the children, photos of me and Jessica from when she was young, photos that clearly identified me as family, not as staff, and Jessica saw me looking and said quietly, "I put these up last week. I should have had them up years ago. I am done hiding you, done pretending." During dinner, Jessica did something she had never done. She told stories about me, about how I had worked multiple jobs to pay for her education, about how I had supported her dreams, even when it meant sacrificing my own, about how I had spent 15 years raising her children so she could have her career. And she looked at her children and said clearly, "Your grandmother is the reason I am where I am today, the reason we have this life, and I have been so stupid and so ashamed and so wrong to not acknowledge that, to let you think she was just someone we paid to watch you. She is family. She is our family, and I am sorry it took me so long to say it out loud." The children, especially Ethan, who at 15 was old enough to understand the full weight of everything, said they wanted to spend more time with me, wanted to get to know me better as their grandmother, not as their babysitter. And we made plans for weekly dinners and outings, for building a relationship that was based on truth and choice rather than obligation and service. In the 2 years since that terrible Wednesday afternoon, things have changed slowly and imperfectly. Jessica has been more consistent about introducing me as her mother, has invited me to school events and soccer games and recitals, has started to include me in family photos and social media posts, has made efforts to acknowledge my role in her life and her children's lives. But there is still tension, still moments when I can see her struggling with her shame, still times when she seems to wish I was more polished or sophisticated or educated, and I have had to accept that this is who she is, someone who loves me, but is also embarrassed by me. And that is painful. But it is the truth, and truth, however uncomfortable, is better than the lies we lived with for 15 years. I never went back to providing full-time childcare. That chapter is closed, and Jessica and Richard have figured out their childcare situation through a combination of programs and paid help, and I know that is hard on them financially. I know they struggle with it. But I also know that my labor had value, that 15 years of free childcare was an enormous gift that they took for granted, and I do not regret withdrawing it, do not regret insisting that I be seen and acknowledged and treated as family rather than staff. My relationship with my grandchildren has deepened in unexpected ways. Now that they know the full truth of who I am and what I did for them, they seem to appreciate me more, to seek me out more, to want to know my stories and my history. And we have conversations now about class and shame and identity that are painful, but important. Conversations about what it means to come from working-class roots and achieve middle-class or upper-class status, about the ways we carry our origins with us even when we try to shed them, about the cost of denying where we come from. Ethan, who is now 17 and thinking about college, has told me he wants to write his college essay about me. About what? I taught him about sacrifice and love and dignity. And when he said that, I cried because it felt like proof that the truth had been worth telling, that the pain of that Wednesday afternoon had led to something real and valuable, that my grandchildren finally knew who I was and understood what I had given them. Jessica and I will never have the uncomplicated mother-daughter relationship I once dreamed of. There is too much hurt and too much history and too much shame between us, but we have something. We have honesty, at least. We have conversations where she admits her struggles with accepting her background, and I admit my hurt at being denied and erased. We have a relationship that is messy and real and based on truth, rather than the comfortable lies we lived with for so many years. And while it is not what I wanted, it is better than the alternative of continuing to be invisible, continuing to give everything and receive nothing but the crumbs of acknowledgement Jessica was willing to offer when no one important was watching. Looking back on those 15 years now, I have such complicated feelings. On one hand, I treasure the time I spent with my grandchildren, treasure being there for their first words and first steps and first days of school, treasure the bond we built even when they did not fully understand who I was. Those moments were real and precious, and I would not trade them for anything. But on the other hand, I am angry, so angry at myself for accepting so little for so long, for not demanding respect and acknowledgement from the beginning, for letting Jessica establish a pattern where I was invisible and unappreciated, for teaching my grandchildren by example that it was acceptable to take advantage of people who love you, to use them until they have nothing left to give, and then be surprised when they finally set boundaries. I think about all the things I gave up during those 15 years, the friendships I could not maintain because I was too exhausted, the hobbies I never pursued because I had no time, the possibility of companionship or romance in my later years that I never explored because I was too busy raising someone else's children, the retirement I should have been enjoying but instead spent in service to a daughter who could not even publicly claim me as her mother. And I grieve for the life I could have had, the version of my 60s where I traveled or volunteered for causes I cared about or simply rested after a lifetime of work, instead of spending them in the same exhausting cycle of childcare that I had done when my own child was young. But I also know that if I had it to do over again, I probably would have made the same choices, because that is who I am. That is what mothers and grandmothers do. We give and give and give, because we love, because we cannot bear to see our children struggle, because we want to help even when helping costs us everything. And the problem is not that we give, the problem is that our giving is taken for granted, expected, treated as endless and inexhaustible, rather than recognized as the extraordinary gift it is. What I wish I had known at the beginning, what I wish I could tell my younger self when Jessica first asked for help with childcare, is that help should have limits, that saying yes should come with conditions, that love does not require self-erasure, that it is possible to be generous while still maintaining boundaries and demanding respect, that I could have said, yes, I will help you with childcare, but you will acknowledge me as the grandmother. You will introduce me as your mother. You will include me in family events and decisions. You will treat me as family, not as staff. And if you cannot do those things, then we need to find a different arrangement. But I did not know that then. I did not know that I had the right to make demands. I thought love meant saying yes to everything, accepting whatever terms were offered, being grateful to be included at all, even if the inclusion was conditional and grudging and came with erasure, attached, and I am still learning, even now at 72, that I deserve better, that my love and labor and sacrifice have value, that I do not have to accept being diminished in order to maintain relationships, that sometimes the most loving thing I can do for myself and for my family is to insist on being seen. I have become involved in a support group for grandparents, mostly grandmothers if I am honest, who have similar stories of being taken advantage of providing free childcare for years or decades while being treated as less than family, of watching their adult children build careers and comfortable lives on the foundation of grandparent labor that is never acknowledged or compensated or even really appreciated. And hearing their stories has helped me understand that this is not just my personal failure. This is a systemic issue. This is about how society devalues the labor of older women, how we are expected to give and never ask for anything. In return, how our contributions are invisible until we withdraw them, and suddenly everyone realizes how much we were actually doing. One woman in my group, her name is Patricia, told us that she had been providing full-time childcare for her twin grandchildren for 8 years, picking them up from school every day, keeping them until their parents got home from work, feeding them dinner, helping with homework. And she was never invited to their birthday parties because her son's wife said they were keeping the parties small and just for close family. And Patricia said, "But I am close family. I am their grandmother. I see them more than anyone except their parents." And her daughter-in-law said, "Yes, but you are more like their nanny. We want to keep it to actual relatives." And Patricia was so hurt she cried for days. And then she did what I did. She stopped providing childcare. She said if she was going to be treated like a nanny, then she should be paid like one. And when her son and daughter-in-law protested, when she presented them with a bill for 8 years of childcare at the going rate for professional nannies in their area, $40 an hour, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, and the total was over $300,000. And she said she was not actually expecting them to pay it, but she wanted them to understand the value of what they had been getting for free, wanted them to see in concrete numbers what her labor was worth, wanted them to acknowledge that she had been giving them an extraordinary gift that they had treated as an entitlement. Her son and daughter-in-law were shocked, had never thought about it in those terms, had genuinely not understood that what Patricia was doing had monetary value, and that realization changed things. They started treating her with more respect, including her in family events, acknowledging her role in the twins' lives, and Patricia felt seen for the first time in years, felt like her labor mattered, felt like she had finally gotten through to them about what they had been taking for granted. Hearing Patricia's story and others, like it helped me understand that I was not crazy for being hurt, that my reaction was not overblown or unreasonable, that what Jessica did to me was real harm, real erasure, real devaluation, and that I had every right to be angry and to demand change. And that validation from other grandmothers who understood was healing in ways I cannot fully articulate. If you're still watching, if you have stayed with me through this long and painful story, please do one thing for me right now. Please subscribe to this channel and share this video, because grandparents need to hear these stories, need to understand that they are not alone in feeling used and invisible and taken for granted, need to know that it is okay to set boundaries, that it is okay to say no, that it is okay to demand respect and acknowledgement, and every subscription helps us reach more people with this message. So please take that small action right now. Click, subscribe, share this video, leave a comment telling your own story. Help us build a community where grandparents support each other in demanding the treatment we deserve. I want to talk about money for a moment because I know some people watching this are thinking, well, she was helping family. She should not expect to be paid. Family helps each other without expecting compensation. And to those people, I say, you are missing the point. The point is not that I should have been paid, though frankly, 15 years of full-time childcare probably should have come with some compensation given that Jessica and Richard could afford their large house and nice cars and vacations. But the point is that even if the labor is free, even if it is given out of love, it still has value. It still deserves acknowledgement. The person providing it still deserves to be treated with respect and included as family. And what Jessica did by pretending I was just the babysitter was not about money. It was about status. It was about her being too ashamed of me to publicly acknowledge our relationship. And that is what hurt. That is what was unforgivable. Not that I was not paid, but that I was erased. And here is another thing that people do not talk about enough: the opportunity cost of providing free childcare, the things you give up, the life you do not get to live because you are spending all your time and energy raising someone else's children. I could have worked full-time during those 15 years and saved money for my retirement. Could have built a nest egg that would give me security in my old age, but instead I worked part-time at minimum wage while providing free childcare. And now, at 72, I am living on Social Security and struggling to make ends meet, while Jessica and Richard, whose careers I made possible by providing that free childcare, are comfortable and secure. And I am not saying they owe me money. I am saying that my sacrifice had real financial consequences for me. Consequences that are permanent and that affect my quality of life now. And those consequences should be acknowledged, should be appreciated, should be unhonored, rather than dismissed as just what grandmothers do. There is also the physical toll. I am 72, and my body is worn out from decades of hard work, including 15 years of chasing after small children when I should have been slowing down. My knees are bad from getting up and down off the floor to play with toddlers. My back hurts constantly from lifting babies and car seats and strollers. My hands have arthritis that I am convinced was made worse by years of doing dishes and laundry and preparing meals. And these are permanent physical consequences that I live with every day. And when I mention this to Jessica, she says, "Well, you did not have to do all that. I did not ask you to do the laundry and dishes. You chose to do those things." As if it would have been possible to spend 10 hours a day in a house with 3 children and not end up doing the laundry and dishes. As if I was supposed to sit there while the sink filled with dirty dishes and just ignore it. As if the cleaning and cooking and household management was separate from the childcare, when in reality, it was all one overwhelming job that I did because it needed to be done, and I was the only one there to do it. I have had to learn to set boundaries around my physical limitations now. To say no, I cannot babysit this weekend because my knees hurt. No, I cannot keep the children overnight because I need my rest. No, I cannot take all 3 of them to the park by myself because I do not have the stamina anymore. And every time I set these boundaries, I feel guilty, feel like I am letting them down, feel like I am being selfish, and I have to remind myself that I have given enough, that I have sacrificed enough, that I am allowed to prioritize my own health and well-being, that saying no does not make me a bad grandmother. It makes me a grandmother who has learned that self-preservation is not selfish, it is necessary. The relationship with my grandchildren has evolved into something that feels more balanced now. I see them regularly, but on a schedule that works for me. We do activities that I can manage physically, and they are old enough now to understand that I am not available for unlimited service, that I am a person with my own needs and limitations. And I think that understanding is actually good for them, is teaching them something important about respecting elders and not taking people for granted, something they would not have learned if I had continued to be endlessly available and never asserted my own needs. Ethan is preparing to go to college next year, and he has asked me to help him with his college essay about me, and working on it with him has been emotional, hearing him articulate what I meant to him during his childhood, how he remembers me always being there, always patient and loving and present, and then learning the truth about who I really was, and feeling betrayed by his mother for lying to him, and then coming to appreciate me in a deeper way once he understood the full story. And he writes about how I taught him about sacrifice and love, but also about boundaries and self-respect, about how watching me stand up to his mother and demand to be acknowledged showed him that it is possible to love someone and still refuse to accept disrespect. And reading his words, I feel like maybe the pain of those 15 years and the pain of that confrontation and the pain of the last 2 years of rebuilding have produced something valuable, have taught the next generation something important about dignity and worth and the cost of love. Claire, who is now 13, and in that phase where teenage girls are figuring out who they are and what they believe, has started asking me questions about class and feminism and family, trying to understand her mother's shame and my hurt and how we got to where we are. And we have conversations that I treasure. Conversations where I try to help her understand that your background does not define you, but denying it does damage, that there is no shame in coming from working-class roots, that the people who worked in factories and grocery stores to support their families deserve as much respect as the people who work in offices and wear suits. And I see her processing this, see her forming her own opinions about wealth and status and what really matters, and I have hope that she will grow up to be someone who values people for who they are rather than what they have or where they come from. Lucas, my youngest grandson, who is now 12, has the simplest relationship with all of this. He just knows that there was a time when he thought I was the babysitter, and now he knows I am his grandmother, and he loves me either way, and his uncomplicated affection is healing, is a reminder that children are capable of love that is not contingent on status or explanations, that sometimes the bonds we form are deeper than the labels we use to describe them. I have started painting in my spare time, something I always wanted to do but never had time for during those 15 years of childcare. And I am not very good at it, but I enjoy it. Enjoy creating something that is mine, that represents my vision and my feelings, that exists independent of my roles as mother and grandmother and caregiver. And I have a small studio apartment now that is filled with my paintings and my books and my things. And when my grandchildren come to visit, they see this space that is wholly mine, and I think it teaches them something about me as a person, beyond my function in their lives, teaches them that I have interior world and interests and identity that exist separate from my relationship to them. I joined a book club and a walking group at my local senior center, finally making time for friendships and social connections that I neglected during those years of constant caregiving, and having friends who know me as Barbara, not as Jessica's mother or the children's grandmother, just as Barbara who likes mystery novels and walks in the park and has opinions about politics and recipes and life, has been restorative, has reminded me that I am a complete person with value that is not dependent on my service to others. Have also been learning to spend money on myself without guilt. Small things like getting my hair cut at a salon instead of doing it myself, buying new clothes instead of wearing the same worn-out things for years, going out to eat occasionally instead of always cooking at home to save money. And these small acts of self-care feel revolutionary, feel like I am finally acknowledging that I deserve nice things, that I am worth investing in, that deprivation is not a virtue, especially when it is self-imposed to save money that I then give to people who do not appreciate the sacrifice. If you are a grandparent watching this, and you are currently in the situation I was in, providing endless free childcare while being taken for granted and treated as invisible, please hear me when I say you deserve better. You deserve acknowledgement and appreciation and respect. You deserve to be included as family, not treated as staff. You deserve to have your own life and your own interests and your own boundaries. And it is never too late to start demanding better treatment, never too late to say enough, never too late to choose yourself. And if you are an adult child who has a parent providing free childcare, please take a moment to really see them, to acknowledge what they are doing for you, to understand the value of their labor and the cost of their sacrifice, to include them in your family life not as an afterthought or an obligation, but as a cherished member who has earned their place through years of love and service, to introduce them proudly as your mother or father, to tell your children the truth about who they are and what they have done, to honor them while they are still here to receive that honor. The thing that still hurts the most when I think about those 15 years is not the physical exhaustion or the financial cost or even the time I lost. It is the erasure, the feeling of being invisible, of being present in body but absent in acknowledgement, of loving people with my whole heart while they were too ashamed to publicly claim me. And I think about all the times I stood on the sidelines, at school events watching my grandchildren perform, while their teachers and other parents assumed I was just the hired help. All the times I was cropped out of family photos or not included in the frame at all. All the times Jessica talked about her life and her children without mentioning me, as if the childcare happened by magic, as if the children raised themselves while she worked, as if I did not exist or did not matter. And that erasure, that systematic denial of my presence and my contribution, that is what broke something inside me that can never be fully repaired. But here is what I have learned. Here is the gift that came wrapped in all that pain. I have learned that I do not need other people to see me to know that I have value. I have learned that I can acknowledge my own worth, even when others deny it. I have learned that setting boundaries is not cruelty but kindness to myself. I have learned that I can love people and still refuse to accept mistreatment from them. I have learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Never too late to demand respect. Never too late to say, this is who I am. And if you cannot acknowledge that, then we need to renegotiate our relationship or end it entirely. I have learned that relationships based on lies, even comfortable, convenient lies, are not sustainable. That truth, however painful, is the only foundation for real connection. That I would rather be alone and seen than surrounded by people who only want me when I am invisible and useful. I have learned that my labor has value, whether or not anyone pays me for it. That the 15 years I spent raising my grandchildren were not wasted even though they were not properly acknowledged. That those children know they were loved, and that knowledge will stay with them even as the specific memories fade. That I planted seeds during those years that are bearing fruit now in the form of relationships that are deeper and more honest than they could have been if the lies had continued. I have learned that class shame is real and powerful, and can twist people into knots, can make them deny their own mothers, can make them so desperate to belong to a world they were not born into that they will sacrifice anything, including truth and family and basic decency. And I have compassion for that struggle, even as I refuse to be sacrificed to it. I understand why Jessica felt the way she did, even as I maintain that she was wrong to handle it the way she did, that she should have dealt with her shame through therapy or self-reflection, rather than by erasing me. I have learned that grandmothers are often the invisible backbone of families, providing labor and support and love that makes everything else possible but receiving little credit or appreciation, and that this is not just individual families being thoughtless, but a cultural issue, a systemic devaluation of the work that older women do, an assumption that we exist to serve, and that our service requires no reciprocation. And I have become passionate about changing that narrative, about insisting that grandparent labor be recognized and valued, about encouraging grandparents to set boundaries and demand respect, about teaching the next generation That taking advantage of people's love is not acceptable, even when the people being exploited are your own parents. I wish I could tell you that everything is perfect now, that Jessica and I have a beautiful, uncomplicated relationship, and that all the hurt has healed, and that we have achieved some kind of Hollywood ending where everyone learns their lesson and lives happily ever after. But that is not the truth. The truth is messier and harder and more ambiguous. Jessica is still working through her issues with shame and class. I am still working through my hurt and anger. We still have conversations that are difficult and painful. We still trigger each other's wounds. But we also have something we did not have before. We have honesty. We have acknowledgement. We have a relationship that is based on truth rather than comfortable lies. And while that relationship is not what I hoped for, it is real. And real is better than false. Honest is better than easy. Seen is better than invisible, even when being seen means also being seen in your hurt and disappointment. My grandchildren are growing up now, becoming young adults with their own perspectives on family and relationships and what matters. And they have told me that watching our family go through this crisis and this rebuilding has taught them things they would not have learned in a family that looked perfect on the surface. They have learned that conflict can be productive, that truth-telling can be healing even when it is painful, that relationships worth having are worth fighting for, that love sometimes means setting boundaries, that grandparents are people with needs and feelings and dignity that deserve to be respected, and they have promised me that when they have children of their own, they will remember these lessons, will treat their parents and in-laws with the respect and acknowledgement they deserve, will never take for granted the labor and love of the people who help them. And hearing those promises gives me hope that something good has come from all the pain. If I could go back and talk to myself, on that first day when Jessica asked me to help with childcare, on that day when Ethan was just a tiny baby, and I was so thrilled to be needed and included and given a role in my grandson's life, I would tell myself to say yes, to take the opportunity to love these children and be part of their lives. But I would also tell myself to set conditions, to insist on being acknowledged as the grandmother, to require inclusion in family events, to demand respect and appreciation, to protect my own time and energy and health, to remember that I am a person with value beyond my utility, to understand that love does not require self-erasure, that I can be generous while also maintaining boundaries, that saying yes does not mean saying yes to everything, including my own diminishment. I would tell myself that it is okay to have needs, okay to expect reciprocity, okay to walk away if the terms of the relationship are unacceptable, that there is no virtue in martyrdom, no honor in being used, no nobility in accepting less than I deserve, and that the people who truly love me will be capable of treating me with basic respect, and if they are not capable of that, then perhaps they do not deserve my unlimited service. But I could not go back. None of us can. We can only move forward with the wisdom we have gained through pain. And so I am moving forward, building a life that honors me, maintaining relationships that are based on mutual respect, setting boundaries that protect my well-being, and trying to use my experience to help other grandparents understand that they deserve better, that their labor has value, that they do not have to accept being invisible and taken for granted, that it is never too late to stand up for yourself and demand to be seen. My name is Barbara. I am 72 years old. I babysat for free for 15 years. My daughter told her children I was just the babysitter. They found out the truth, and that truth, as painful as it was to reveal, set all of us free in different ways. Free from lies, free from shame, free from the burden of maintaining false narratives, free to build relationships based on honesty. And while the cost of that freedom was high, while we lost some of the easy, comfortable closeness we had when everyone was pretending, what we gained was something more valuable. We gained authenticity. We gained dignity. We gained the possibility of real connection based on truth rather than convenience. And I would make that trade again. Would choose truth over comfort. Would choose being seen over being invisible. Would choose standing up for myself over accepting mistreatment. Because at 72 years old, I have finally learned that I matter. That I have always mattered. That my worth is not dependent on whether other people acknowledge it. And that lesson, learned so late and at such cost, is the most valuable thing I own. Thank you for staying with me through this long and difficult story. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain and my healing. Thank you for being part of a community that says grandparents deserve respect. And if my story has touched you, if you see yourself in my experience, if you're currently living some version of what I lived through, please know that you are not alone. Please know that you deserve better. Please know that it is not too late to set boundaries and demand acknowledgement. Please know that your labor has value, and your love is a gift, not an obligation, and you do not have to accept being erased to maintain relationships. And please, please, subscribe to this channel and share this video so that other grandparents can find this message and understand that they are not alone in their struggle. That there is a community of us who understand, who validate, who support each other in demanding the respect we have earned through years of love and service. Subscribe now and be part of this movement of grandparents who are reclaiming their dignity and their worth.